Mary Todd Lincoln is one of our most famous First Ladies, and she's also one of our most misunderstood and controversial First Ladies, and there are many stories about her. Mary was born in 1818 in Lexington, Kentucky, the daughter of a wealthy businessman. She had a large family, with many brothers and sisters. Her mother died when she was 8 years old, and her father soon remarried and had more children, so there was plenty of young people for Mary to grow up with. She had the life that any young Southern belle growing up in a border state could wish. She was attended by servants, had a fine house, fashionable clothes, went to the best parties, and had the attention of all the young men in the neighborhood. She also went to finishing school, and in addition to dancing and drawing, learned to speak French, one of our many First Ladies throughout the years that have had that skill. In 1839, Mary's sister Elizabeth, who had moved to Illinois, invited her younger sister to come to Illinois to assist her with her social obligations there. Elizabeth was the wife of Ninian Edwards, an up-and-coming young Springfield, Illinois attorney who would one day be governor of the state, and she certainly had need of a younger sister who had all the graces and accomplishments and was also witty and vivacious and pretty to boot. Ninian Edwards' colleague was a young man by the name of Abraham Lincoln. He was an attorney, he was a storyteller, he liked to have people gather around him, and he and Mary soon developed an attraction for each other. They were married on November the 4th of 1842. Then Mary quickly became pregnant, and on August the 1st of 1843, their first child, Robert, was born. Some have speculated that because there was not quite 9 months between the wedding and the birth of Robert, that perhaps Abraham and Mary anticipated their wedding by a few days or weeks. However, in those days, given that Springfield was still considered a western frontier town in the early Victorian era, the idea that a young, soon-to-be married couple might have anticipated their wedding vows was not as much of a scandal as long as it was kept quiet. And as well, in that day and age, the way of predicting an exact due date of a baby was not an exact science, and Mary was known to have trouble throughout all 4 of her pregnancies, making it very plausible that Robert was just, in fact, a premature infant. Other babies soon followed. There was Eddie in 1846, Willie in 1850, and Thomas, or Tad, in 1853. After her marriage to Abraham Lincoln, reality soon set in for Mary Todd. She did not have the access to the servants that she had enjoyed in her father's household or that of her sister, and she had to do the cleaning, the cooking, and the taking care of children by herself. She was often lonely. Lincoln was away following the circuit courts in Illinois, and later on serving in the United States House of Representatives, and Mary, because their family was not wealthy at the time, could not afford the fine clothes and the parties and the other entertainments that she was accustomed to. Tragedy struck Mary in 1850 when her son Eddie died of complications from his thyroid. The strain of life and marriage and children and the death of this one child quickly took its toll on Mary. She developed headaches and other illnesses, and also because of the pain and just the anxiety that she was suffering, developed a temper and was also known to be jealous of Abraham. Because he was an attractive person to be around, he was a very convivial and joking, funny type person to be around. Abraham Lincoln attracted friends of both sexes, and Mary was particularly jealous when the friends, the wives and daughters of colleagues and friends, paid too much attention to her husband. There were stories of quarrels, some of them getting physical on Mary's side, and indications that Lincoln would have to spend nights on the couch in his law office just to get some peace and quiet. In 1860, things seemed to be looking up for Mary. Lincoln was elected president, and Mary felt that in Washington, D.C., which was a southern city, as the wife of the president, she would have everything that her heart could desire: a fine home, servants, beautiful clothes, access to the best society, and the ability to throw as many parties and balls as she wished. However, when she arrived in Washington, she found a rude awakening. Washington was a southern city, but many of the wives of the senators and army officers who had decided to go with the South had left the city. The few that remained behind were jealous of their social position. They had been in Washington sometimes for generations, and they saw no reason to defer to a woman from a western frontier border state background, even if she was the First Lady. Other women found Mary Todd Lincoln's fine clothes, French-speaking, and imperious ways to be frankly off-putting, and they didn't quite care for her company. Undaunted, Mary set about ordering the best clothes from the finest dressmakers that the city could afford and throwing the most lavish parties that the White House had ever seen. Soon she was developing yet more negative social commentary. Because of the suffering caused by the war, many people felt that the extravagant parties and balls were not appropriate. Most of Mary's family had, although they were from Kentucky, had sided with the South, and many of her brothers and half-brothers were fighting for the Confederacy. Nevertheless, Mary kept contact with many of her relatives in Kentucky, which caused some people to believe that she was disloyal, or worse yet, an outright Confederate spy. Tragedy soon struck Mary Todd Lincoln in the White House in 1862, when first of all her younger half-brother Alexander was killed in battle fighting for the Confederacy, and her son Willie died of typhoid fever in 1862. Mary, although she was a churchgoer, did not find comfort in traditional spiritual solaces for her grief, and soon turned to a more controversial substitute. In that day and age, spiritualism or spiritism was a common practice among many people who treated tarot card readings and crystal gazings and seances much the way people would treat modern board games like Scrabble or Monopoly. People would gather around these and play these innocent or supposedly innocent games and try to make contact with those from the other side. Mary soon joined along with this, desperately hoping to get some word from her half-brother or her son from beyond. Abraham Lincoln was not happy with his wife's activities. He considered spiritualists and crystal gazers and others of their kind to be quacks. He attended one seance in the White House and indicated to an assistant later that whatever he felt there was not a positive presence and was not his son Willie. Upset by his experience, he put his foot down and forbade Mary to have any more such goings-on in the White House, and his disbelief in her passion for the occult soon caused yet more friction between them. Isolated and lonely, Mary's health worsened. The headaches, the bouts of sickness increased, and she spent much time alone in her room. When she was able to go out, Mary found solace in going to the hospitals and nursing the wounded, writing letters home for them, and bringing food and other comforts for them. That she was very zealous in doing this was lost on many of the members of Washington society, who preferred instead to gossip about her, snicker at her, plan their parties to conflict with her events at the White House, and otherwise do what they could to stab her in the back. Painful scenes between Mary and other females continued whenever she felt that someone was paying too much attention to the president. She and Julia Dent Grant, the wife of the commanding general, Ulysses Grant, did not get along at all. Mrs. Grant was also from a southern state, had relatives that were fighting for the southern cause, and was herself similarly torn in her loyalties like Mary. She also came from a wealthy social class, knew what social niceties were expected, and was displeased by Mary's behavior. In 1864, though, Mary had reason to hope. Lincoln was elected to a second term in office, and in 1865, in April, with the surrender of General Lee's forces, the war was over. In late 1865, in April, Mary and her husband Abraham decided to celebrate with a night out at a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Mrs. Grant refused to accompany the President and First Lady because of her dislike of Mary Lincoln, and when they were able to get another young couple to go with them, the Lincolns went to Ford's Theater and settled into the presidential box to watch the play. Mary Lincoln was only a few feet from her husband when Mr. Lincoln was shot in the head by John Wilkes Booth. Beyond hysterical, Mary Lincoln cradled her husband's bleeding head in her lap, and later on stood weeping by his bedside as his life slowly ebbed away. After his death, Mary continued to wander throughout the United States and in Europe, seeking solace in her travels. But in 1871, her son Thomas died of heart failure, and in 1875, her hold on sanity completely slipped. She traveled to Florida, but then quickly returned to Illinois, convinced that her older son Robert had been killed. Robert was alive and well, but was now convinced that his mother's extravagant spending and delusions had got the better of her. He had her committed to an asylum for several months and gained control of her affairs. In 1876, Mary finally won the right to control her own financial affairs and continued to live independently until 1879, when she fell and broke her ankle and had to move in with her sister Elizabeth. Mary remained in Elizabeth's home until 1882, when she finally died, a very tormented woman who did not realize a lot of the hopes and dreams that she had expected to throughout her life.